Hi, my name is Lo, and welcome to the Romance Seriously podcast, where I take a serious look at romantic movies. Today's movie is 2024's Love Divided, starring Fernando Aguilar and Aitana. We open with a piano. Actually, we open with a cute animated sequence and a delightful throwback to the mid-century, but the piano is where the story really starts. It's being moved into an apartment as our heroine, Valentina, played by Aitana, prays for the movers to be careful. Her cousin Carmen tries to reassure her that everything is fine, only for the piano to grind to a halt and then nearly plummet to the ground following Carmen's unhelpful intervention. Her heart is in the right place, but Valentina's is in her throat, and I think mine is too. Thankfully, the piano, and the rest of Valentina's things, do get into her new apartment without disaster. Carmen tells her that she got Valentina a job. Valentina tries to deflect as she has an audition in 3 weeks and needs to practice, but Carmen reminds her of the harsh reality of rent. Valentina relents and asks what the job is. The job turns out to be as a waitress. Valentina doesn't have experience behind a bar or serving, but thanks to an ex-boyfriend, she does have experience with gluten-free detox smoothies, and that lands her the job. Next we meet our hero, David, played by Aguilar. His apartment is full to bursting with gears, robots, Rube Goldberg machines, and a cat, who is apparently nagging him about his latest project. His friend Nacho drops by with groceries and is duly informed about the new tenant next door. David muses that who they are won't matter, as they'll be gone in a day. We also learn it's been 3 years since David left his apartment, and Nacho is well past concerned. David is a game designer, and has spent those 3 years working on his new project called the Ultimax. Nacho is worried that the Ultimax is so overly complicated that, right now, no one could even win the game. David simply remarks that of course you can't win, the fun is in trying. Nacho is unconvinced. That evening, Valentina is quietly singing to herself with a classic toothbrush microphone when a loud, eerie noise comes from next door and keeps on coming. Valentina is justifiably freaked as the shuddering, clanging, metal-on-metal noises continue. So much that she ends up fleeing her apartment and, yeah. If my apartment was inundated with the sounds of a horror movie, I'd flee too. She goes to stay with Oscar, her ex. He's respectful, understanding, and utterly slimy about it. He tries to wrap his behavior in thoughtfulness, but he can't hide that he talks down to Valentina. Watching them is more like watching a parent with a child, and not even a supportive parent, but a manipulative one who wants to make sure their child never leaves. Toss in the visible age gap of 15 to 20 years, and gross. Gross, gross, gross. No thank you. Nope. Thankfully, Valentina feels the same and is resolved to stay in her apartment. Later that night, Valentina stares at her bath in trepidation when the banging kicks in again. This time, she yells at the wall to be quiet. We pan over to see David making the frankly terrifying noises for sheer fuckery in order to drive her out, which, fuck you. So much fuck you. Thankfully, his machinations are revealed when his cat mews. She awkwardly says hi and asks why he's trying to scare her. David answers that it's because the insulation is so thin that they can hear everything in each other's apartment, and no one is ever willing to pony up the money to fix it. Which is not an answer, and also that wall is brick. Valentina offers to meet in the hall to discuss things, but David informs her that they're not actually in the same building, and also the district boundaries run between them. Which is not making anything any clearer, and I am so close to going down a rabbit hole of Spanish building codes. David says the real problem is that he works from home and needs absolute silence, and that includes Valentina's piano rehearsals. Valentina offers to set up a schedule, but David proves that when he says they can hear everything, he means everything, pouring coffee from one cup to another to make his point. What the fuck is that wall made from? Tissue paper? So one of them will have to move, and he was here first. Valentina becomes indignant when she realizes he's been tormenting his neighbors out and refuses to leave. The two go to war, machinery and tools against music. After a week, Valentina is dead on her feet. She's getting ready to call it in, but Carmen gives her a pep talk and encourages her to step her game up instead. Inspired, Valentina sets a metronome up right by the wall and leaves. For hours. Driven to the edge, David agrees to Valentina's terms and makes a schedule. Finally able to rehearse in peace, she resumes preparing for her audition. Once it hits noon, David informs Valentina that it's his time, but she pushes for a few more minutes. She has one part she needs to work on, and she's almost got it. David informs her that, no, she doesn't. Thanks to a childhood spent with his sound engineer father, he knows classical music. Beethoven spent his life grieving his mother and being pushed to the edge by his stage father. It requires rage and loneliness, and what Valentina's doing is not Beethoven. Her technique might be perfect, but there's no soul. Valentina, incensed at David's criticism, lets the anger into her playing. And now it sounds like Beethoven. That night the two apologize. Valentina for going overboard, David for being so harsh. The two settle down and have a proper conversation. David tells her that he's heard her singing, and she has a good voice. Valentina brushes the compliment off. She used to write and compose her own songs, but doesn't anymore. Her ex, a conductor, told her to quit wasting her time and focus on the piano. David asks the obvious question of why Valentina can't both sing and play, but again, her ex told her she had to pick one, and Valentina obeyed. So Oscar also had professional authority over her and used it. Lovely. Valentina, meanwhile, has noted that David doesn't get out much. The two shy, lonely people admit that it's nice talking through the wall. It helps take off the pressure that they both feel when having to talk to people. David even says his ideal date is one where they don't talk, instead enjoying the food and each other's presence in silence. The two go on chatting through the night. The next day, Valentina and David's improved relationship continues. Valentina even excitedly spots a man who might be David, based on his rough description of himself of the night before. However, he's not wearing cowboy boots, the only shoes David wears due to his love of westerns. Valentina gets another shot, though, when she sees another man who ticks all the boxes on David's description. In the midst of some truly terrible waitressing, she slips the mystery man a note, inviting him to her apartment for dinner in silence. David, meanwhile, gets a call from Nacho. His car got towed, and with it his wallet, keys, and phone. He had to borrow one just to call David, who he desperately needs to bring him some cash so he can get his car out of impound. David tries to refuse, as he hasn't left his apartment in 3 years, but in the end, his loyalty wins out. And maybe it shouldn't have, as Nacho was actually luring David to a meeting with executives from a major toy chain. They want a distribution deal for David's newest game, but David is having none of it, claiming they only think about numbers and never the children. Needless to say, he rejects the offer. Valentina's date goes unsurprisingly poorly. It starts off awkward as she indeed tries to stay completely silent, but when she realizes that she's not on a date with her neighbor when she hears him come home, her date is promptly and quietly shown the door. I feel so bad for that guy. He gets asked out by a beautiful woman only for her to refuse to talk to him and toss him out when he tries to make normal conversation. He is winning every worst date contest until the end of time. David asks Valentina if she wants to come over, but she says no. Not because she doesn't like him, but because she does. She likes the quiet, the conversations, and how the wall eases pressure. She says that she needs to be alone for a little while. So the two agree to date through the wall. Each having pushed their bed against the shared wall, they spend all their time together. Chatting and getting to know each other, yes, but also playing Battleship, having breakfast, and watching movies. It's surprisingly sweet. At work, Valentina is surprised to see Oscar. She tries to pretend she doesn't work at the cafe, clearly not wanting to deal with his judgment. Carmen also tries to deflect him, but Oscar is not firm on the concept of no means no and backs them into joining him. He mentions just how many applicants there are for the audition Valentina is preparing for, giving another knock to her confidence. Thankfully, Carmen is able to get him away from Valentina by claiming her wallet has been stolen and she needs him to drive her to the police station. Yes, it's 4 blocks away, but she's distraught. Valentina explains her odd behavior to her boss. In her mind, she owes him everything. Oscar discovered her, got her out of her hometown, got her the best teachers, talked her out of her crazy dreams of singing. He's the reason she even has a chance for this audition, and without it, she has no idea what to do. All she knows is the piano and waitressing, and she's not even good at the latter. Her boss tries to reassure her that she was already playing before Oscar, that her talent is innate, but more importantly, that she needs to believe in herself. After years of Oscar, though, that's clearly easier said than done. That night, when Valentina finishes her rehearsals, David asks if she takes requests. When she agrees, he asks to hear her own song, the one he heard her singing the first day. Valentina is reluctant, as she hasn't played that one in years, but agrees and performs it. Later, the two have a dinner party with Nacho and Carmen. They made the same meal together, though Valentina's went much worse, cooking is clearly not her strong suit, and have pushed their tables by the wall. Nacho and Carmen are understandably concerned, though Nacho is mostly relieved David hasn't completely lost it, but come around and even hit it off fairly well themselves. The next day, Valentina registers for the audition. While there, she overhears Oscar conducting the orchestra. To the shock of no one, he's also an asshole in professional contexts, yelling at the musicians and insisting the greatness of Beethoven is in the technique, unlike David's view. He then manages to insult and belittle them by telling them to aspire to be artists, the quiet part being that they're not artists now. It's almost impressive how insidious he is. He sees Valentina watching the rehearsal and continues to give little digs at her as he pushes her towards the audition. And while Valentina seems to be a little fed up with his patronizing behavior, she's still so in awe of his musical skill that she invites him over to listen to her audition piece. She comes home and quickly cleans up, asking David to keep quiet as she values Oscar's opinions so highly. David agrees, reluctantly. He doesn't do a great job, though, clearly hearing through Oscar's bullshit. He keeps knocking Valentina down with backhanded barbs, trying to get her to move back in with him and under his thumb. Eventually, David gets so fed up he busts out the terrifying noisemakers and spooks Oscar out. Good! Valentina confronts him over his rude behavior, but David simply questions how she put up with Oscar's condescension. The two fight, David wondering why she didn't introduce him, and Valentina accusing him of jealousy. Things come to a head, with Valentina angrily telling him that she has had enough of people telling her how to live her life, that he has no idea how hard she's worked to get here. Which is true. As much as she's under Oscar's spell, actually leaving him in the first place would have been a supreme act of strength for Valentina and deserves respect. The next day, Carmen is having some trouble of her own. She's having a thing with a guy from work, but both of them have complicated housing situations, so actually getting together is proving tricky. She decides to resolve the issue by bringing her boy toy to Valentina's apartment, which David hears, and is also just a shitty thing to do in general. Like, I cannot imagine thinking, oh, I'll have sex in my friend's bed and not tell her. Jesus! What is wrong with some people? David is understandably hurt, but when he confronts her about it, Valentina is somehow upset at him for thinking it was her? Which, I'm sorry, is the logical conclusion here. She breaks things off before going to confront Carmen. Carmen apologizes and calls out Valentina, pointing out that she's using this as an excuse because she's scared. Both Valentina and David stay up at night, thinking about what-ifs and memories. The next day, David goes to his family's toy store and is stunned to see it going out of business. Nacho hadn't told him because he was already so depressed and was hoping David would turn a corner before the store had to close, but he didn't. We also find out the source of David's issues: the loss of his fiancée, who was also Nacho's sister. So Nacho not only lost a sibling, but then had to take on all the caretaking and grief for his best friend, and run a business. Fuck you, David. At the audition, Carmen, her surprise son, and Valentina's boss all show up for moral support. Surprisingly, so does Nacho, and even David, who decides the best time to talk to Valentina is to interrupt her when she is on the stage auditioning. You can't wait 5 minutes? Valentina finishes her audition, but when told to leave for the next applicant, she doesn't, and instead launches into an original song. Unsurprisingly, the pop song does not get her into a classical music academy, but one of the judges does give her a business card for a music producer. Oscar shows up and begins his kindness-wrapped cruelty, but Valentina finally tells him off and breaks free of him for good. Nacho recognizes Carmen's name and voice from the dinner party and introduces himself. The two are smitten and go off to get ice cream with Carmen's son. Valentina, meanwhile, rushes home to apologize. David does as well, and it goes over much better now, when she's not doing something incredibly important. They make up, and in a moment that I'm sure is supposed to be sweet, but is actually batshit insane, David takes a piece from the game he's been designing and knocks a fucking hole in the wall. Valentina crawls through it, and the two finally meet face to face, sharing a kiss. And all I can think is that both of you rent, neither of you have a steady income, and somebody's gonna have to pay for that hole in the wall. I hate all of these people. All of them. Except Nacho. Nacho deserves all the best. He is a precious bean, and I love him, and he really needs new friends. Valentina is a bit awkward and quiet, very focused on her music. She's clearly been stunted by her years with an emotionally abusive ex. In the beginning, you just want to see her grow and thrive and tell her ex to fuck all the way off. But she's still so desperate for his approval, and then she takes her resentment of his treatment of her out on other people who are actually kind to her. I know it's a common pattern, but that doesn't make it any more endearing or make it any more right to do. It just kind of gives her a sour edge. Then there's David. David, if you want to live somewhere quiet, don't live in an apartment in a city. I'm sorry, but people have the right to live in their own homes without thinking of you. And as someone who's had a neighbor who thinks that way, extra fuck you. Get earplugs or move. Then there's the agoraphobia. On the one hand, fuck Nacho for not respecting his friend's issues and tricking him into leaving the apartment. On the other hand, when people say, oh, I can do X anytime I want, apparently in David's case, he meant it. He could just stroll out of his apartment anytime he damn well pleased for the last 3 years and just didn't. Instead, making his loyal friend who lost his sister run all of his errands and be his emotional support human. Fuck you! So much fuck you! At least Oscar I'm supposed to actually hate. He's a great villain because men like him. Men who try to break women and keep them dependent exist. And mentors who do that to students exist. And he's both. He has utterly destroyed Valentina's self-esteem. Everything he does or says undercuts Valentina in some way. From saying that she, a grown woman, isn't ready to live alone, to making her tea when she says she doesn't want any, to telling her that she can come back and live with him if she fails her audition. And it's all wrapped up in this faux gregariousness designed to make Valentina feel bad for not liking his behavior when in reality he's stomping all over her boundaries and ignoring every word she says. And it's not just Valentina, he does it with everybody, saying these theoretically encouraging things like, I am an artist who leads other artists, letting the unsaid, and you're not artists, ring louder than any actual sentence. By the end of the movie, the man's name alone makes me want to take a shower. Ugh. This is how you make a good villain. Everybody in this movie is just so selfish. Utterly unable to think about other people. David for expecting quiet in an apartment in a busy city, Oscar for being a controlling asshole, Carmen for using her friend's place as a hookup pad without asking, or without telling David, hey, it's Carmen, like, Jesus, have some courtesy. And yeah, Valentina for being upset with David for thinking the person having sex in her apartment was her. If anyone's first guess about their neighbor's sex life is that it's actually the neighbor's cousin breaking in, they've lost their mind. Especially when said neighbor is still kind of under the spell of her ex. Even the production, I have questions. I have questions. I have questions about the architecture. The wall in question is just weird. It doesn't look right. If they are not in the same building, then this is supposedly an exterior wall, and yet it's exposed brick on one side, but Valentina's looks like drywall, like it's a totally internal wall on the other. They don't look like it's the same wall when you're looking at it. And it's brick. How does brick let that much noise through? Brick is a pretty soundproof material. It's why it's a good exterior wall material. And it's not just letting through normal conversation volumes, it's letting through things you normally can't hear from one room in an apartment to another. I can't figure out how the logistics of this make sense, and I should not be going down soundproofing rabbit holes because of questionable set design. I can't buy that this is the same wall on each side, and even when they rip it open, I'm still not sure how this is supposed to be two separate buildings, and no, too many questions, too many thoughts, no. Then there's the decision to frame some of the shot reverse shots with the walls. They're interesting, by which I mean disconcerting. Like, yes, we understand that they are talking to their walls when they're talking to each other, but repeated 10-second, 15-second shots of the back of someone's head addressing a wall is a choice. And showing them yelling at the walls instead of focusing on either of their faces, it's just weird. It's weird, and it doesn't work as well as juxtaposing their actual faces or panning through the wall from one side to the other. Instead, we hold on someone's hair screaming at a wall. Decisions were made. I will say I did enjoy the animated opening sequence. It's very vintage, very mid-century Hollywood. It adds a fun edge that the movie in no way, shape, or form picks up on, and I kind of wish it wasn't there for that reason because it gives false hope. Honestly, the two people who really did their jobs are the set and the costume designers. Pardoning the small issue of this wall doesn't feel like the same wall from one side to the other, the sets are fantastic. Valentina is optimistic, and her home is drenched in sun, with big windows and lots of natural light. There's bright yellows and teals and pale woods everywhere. It's light and it's airy, creating this big, open, positive feeling. David, meanwhile, is stuck in the past and mired in darkness. The woods here are much darker, there's a lot more metal, you've got the exposed brick everywhere, and there's a lot less light, both natural and artificial, creating these deep pockets of shadows that almost feel like they're subsuming David. The clothing picks up on their color schemes as well. David is in browns and dark blues, Valentina's in reds and yellows, but also on their mutual shyness via the types of clothes they wear. Both of them wear long, layered outfits with sweaters and jackets. Moreover, their clothes are shapeless and baggy, letting Valentina literally hide in them, both from the world and from their own feelings. The other highlight is David's cat, Murphy, who is adorable by virtue of being a cat. Murphy was named after the world's best cowboy, presumably Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy did in fact have a 21-year career as a singing cowboy in the movies. Before that, Audie Murphy served in the U.S. Army in World War II, where he was one of the most decorated combat soldiers, if not the most highly decorated combat soldier in American history, including being awarded the Medal of Honor. Dude was an absolute badass, and that's kind of an understatement. Love Divided is not good. By the time it ended, I was thankful that David and Valentina were together, because if they are, nobody else has to deal with them. And I was also getting ready to dig into Spanish building codes because none of this movie makes sense and it's going to keep me up at night. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, review, all those good things. Or find me at the Romance Seriously Podcast at gmail.com or romancesrsly on Twitter. See you next time.